In the last video of this series, I reconditioned the balance assembly of my grandfather's Waltham 1883 pocket watch to the point where it had really superb results in a free oscillations test. My next task is to replace a cracked third wheel lower jewel. It's in a chaton. I've already removed it from the base plate. All that remains is to insert a new chaton with jewel into the open hole. Do you find my videos informative, entertaining, or amusing? If so, then help support this channel by buying me a coffee. Just go to the webpage at the address displayed here on the screen and follow the directions. I thank you in advance for your support. Now, back to the video. I purchased a replacement jewel in chaton from Dave's Watch Parts. With it in hand, I now had three choices for how to insert it into the main plate. Choice number one was to use tweezers. This provides many opportunities for it to be dropped or poorly inserted, so no. Choice number two was to use a jewel punch like this one. I like these for removing jewels, but not so much for inserting them, so no. Third choice was to use a Horia or Horia type of jeweling tool. This is what I did with my Horia clone. Fair warning though, I've never done this before and I've received no instruction in it. I'm doing this based on just my own readings and learnings. So if you don't know what a Horia tool is, think of it as a specialized staking set. It's designed for only three tasks: removing jewels, inserting jewels, and re-depthing jewels. You could use a full staking set to do all of those tasks if it has jeweling punches and stumps, a micrometer, stop, and a lever, and many of the full staking sets do. My Kendrick & Davis 18R set does. And if Kendrick & Davis still existed as a company, I'm sure their marketing material would say that the 18R does everything that a Horia tool does and more, and just as well. I could also use a Sights jeweling tool, which is sort of between a staking set and a Horia tool in complexity. But a Horia tool does a very small number of things, 3, very well. Whereas a full-blown staking set does, 275 things very well. But it's much more of a production to use, and it has a lot more fiddling to achieve the same result. Here's a simple example. When you use a full staking set, the very first thing you have to do is find the most suitable hole in the die plate. There's one hole for all the stumps, but then there are a lot of other holes to use if you're not going to be using a stump and the thing you're working on is going to be sitting directly on the die plate. And then you have to use a centering punch to align that hole under the punch guide and then lock the plate into place. And you have to do this every time you use the staking set. Well, with a Horia tool, there's none of that. There's only one hole, and it's always perfectly positioned. So I think this comes down to personal preference. Do you prefer using one uber complete tool that does many tasks, and maybe even enjoy the satisfaction of mastering that one tool? Or do you prefer using multiple tools, each of which is designed for a particular subset of tasks, maybe a very small subset of tasks, and has only the necessary complexity for those tasks? A Horia tool has pump pushers and stumps. The stumps are the thing that goes underneath what you're dealing with, just like in a staking set. And the pump pushers are called pump pushers because the very center has a sort of a pin, or you could call it a pivot, that fits into the hole in the center of the jewel that you're working with, but it's spring-loaded. So when the pump pusher pushes down into the jewel, it's not putting any pressure on the actual jewel hole. And so the goal is to find a pump pusher that will push on the chaton, but not on the jewel itself, because I'm placing the jewel and the chaton on the main plate. And then the stump underneath has to be the right size to support the hole that the chaton is going into, but not actually the chaton itself. This hole in the base plate has a little shelf that the chaton will sit on. So this is actually a pretty easy installation compared to other things that I've read on the web and read in books. A greatly complicating factor is that the hole for this chaton sits right adjacent to a portion of the keyless works that has to be shifted as though you're setting the time so that there's clearance for the pump pusher coming down from above. Without pulling on that setting lever and moving that plate in the keyless works, the hole is partly occluded. This kind of sucks, but that's life in the big city. So my first attempt was to keep things simple and try to place the chaton in the hole without having to disassemble the keyless works. I wanted to keep it in place. I'd already put it together. It's already lubricated. Leave me alone. It's all good. I don't want to muck with it. So I placed the chaton in the hole and proceeded to try to insert the chaton in the movement. And this was a failure. It was a failure because the complication of having to pull on the lever and move the keyless works plate out of the way while I'm pushing down on the pump pusher was just too much. I was going to screw something up. And so I tried to do it that way, and the main plate wasn't level and I couldn't hold the lever properly and da-da-da-da. So I decided, okay, well, I have to disassemble the keyless works to get that keyless works plate out of the way. And so that's what I did next. All right, so the first step is to remove the setting lever itself. And there's one screw holding it down. And so I proceed to do that. So that was easy. The screw comes out and now the setting lever comes out. The spring involved with the setting lever is held down against the base plate with a screw so the spring doesn't come out, so that's pretty easy. Now here's the fun part. There's a cock, I guess you'd call it, because there's only one screw holding it down. I unscrew the screw of that and remove the screw, and then I'm going to remove the cock itself. And that holds down 3 gears, a very small one to the left, the one in the middle, and then the one on the right. And the one on the right comes off with the plate. And I guess I don't feel too bad about that. That's fine. It's on a little sort of pivot built onto the plate. But now here's the comical thing. You see that small gear to the left? Watch what happens. I go to poke at it and doink, it flies off into space. Why? Because there was a spring underneath it that pushed it up against the plate, and I had forgotten about that spring. So that sucker flew off, and I spent 30 minutes looking for it on the floor of my office before finding it. What's the lesson? Be aware, stay awake, remember what you're dealing with, and always, always, always focus on what you're doing. You can see the spring there in the lower middle of the screen, and that's what pushed the gear up and into outer space. I found the gear, got all the keyless works off, and now I'm going to make another attempt to press the jewel and the chaton onto the plate. So things are a lot simpler now. So I place the main plate on the stump and I lower the pump pusher onto the jewel. On the top of the Horia tool is the sort of micrometer screw, and I'm screwing that down and just turning it clockwise, which pushes the pump pusher down onto the jewel. I make sure that the pump pusher is centered in the jewel hole, and I keep turning and poof, it pushes the chaton into place. And that's all there is to it. It's done. And I raise the pump pusher up and I take a look, and sure enough, it is set in place. After the insertion, I reassembled the movement, and I found yet another problem. The movement ran great for a few minutes, then it suddenly stopped. The gear train ground to a halt as though 2 or more parts were in contact and rubbing. Now, the dial and hands were still unattached, so it couldn't be the hands. Because of the free oscillations test, the balance assembly couldn't be the culprit, although its interaction with the pallet lever might be. So the problem was somewhere between the mainspring and the pallet lever. I tore down the movement yet again and re-examined everything yet again. I decided that the most likely culprit was the fact that some of the jewels still had flaws. Now, I knew about them. I had judged the flaws to be minor, and I assumed, hoped, judged, that they wouldn't impact the watch's performance. Essentially, I thought I could get away with leaving those jewels alone. Well, maybe I was wrong about that. So I replaced most of them with jewels from a donor movement and from yet another purchase from Dave's watch parts. I didn't replace one of the jewels, the escape wheel lower jewel. Dave didn't have a replacement, and my donor had a flawed jewel in that position itself. Now, I could do some searching and find it somewhere, I'm sure. But at the moment, I'm leaving it in place for now. I reassembled and lubricated the movement once again and assessed how it performed with the replaced jewels. The movement ran uninterrupted for over 24 hours. I used my iPhone's slow motion video to visually measure a lift angle of 50 degrees. Here are the performance numbers taken 30 minutes after a full wind in the dial down position. Check out that amplitude. And here are the full timing numbers taken 30 minutes after a full wind. The beat error is great, and I think the amplitude is acceptable for a watch that's 118 years old. I would, of course, like to see less amplitude drop in the crown positions, and the crown left rate is an outlier. It's better than the crown positions, but something is going on there that I would need to investigate. Now here are the timing numbers taken 24 hours after a full wind. So 30 minutes after a full wind is on the left side of your screen, and 24 hours after a full wind is on the right side of your screen. And I should note, I positioned the regulator differently in these two samples. I wanted both of them to start the timing run with a small positive rate in the dial down position. So you can see that the amplitude dropped by a good 20 to 25% across all positions, and 3 of those numbers are in the 180s. I'm puzzled that in identical positions, the beat error taken 24 hours after a full wind is greater than taken 30 minutes after a full wind. Now, nothing else changed in the movement except the passage of time. So I think this means one of two things. Either the hairspring has more resistance moving in one direction than the other, which manifests itself when the mainspring has less power, but I have a hard time believing that that's possible. Or, more likely, there's something going on with the interface between the roller jewel and the pallet lever. That is, there's more resistance with the pallet lever swinging in one direction than the other, and this manifests itself more prominently when the mainspring isn't at full power. What could it be? Maybe the roller jewel isn't true and I didn't notice, or one of the pins isn't true, or maybe there's something not right with the pallet jewel's interface to the escape wheel. I don't know, but something's odd there. And here's another oddity. When the movement was initially at full wind, the Timegrapher displayed spurious pixels, and I attributed this to the pocket watch movement being a lot more noisy than a typical wristwatch movement. So I turned down the gain, and the gain on this 1900 Timegrapher is turned as far down as it'll go. But even with the gain turned all the way down, there were spurious blips on the display. These weren't observed when taking measurements 24 hours after a full wind. And here's the kicker. When I wound the movement back up to a full wind, the pixels were also not displayed then. So in other words, these blips were only displayed when the movement was at full wind for the first time. Either these blips are truly spurious, or there was something in the movement that generated spurious noise initially, but no longer. I mean, if they were spurious, well, nothing changed in the movement, so why did they disappear? If these sparkles, I call them sparkles, don't come back, I guess maybe I'll bask in my ignorance and choose to ignore them and just say, well, it was one of those things, who knows? But it's a head scratcher. I'm declaring victory on this movement after about 9 months of working on it. There are still mysteries to investigate, but I think they can wait. I want to work on the case and dial and reassemble the watch. So here's a summary of this movement with the timing numbers from 24 hours after a full wind. The average rate is very high, and I'm going to dial back the regulator so it's not so high before mounting it in the case. There were multiple cracked jewels. In fact, there's still one with a minor flaw that I didn't replace because I couldn't easily find a replacement. So there's still at least one jewel there that ought to be replaced. There were 2 bent pivots on the third wheel and on the balance staff, and the regulator pins were also bent. The mainspring was an old steel one, and it's now an alloy mainspring. I solved a problem with mainspring arbor side shake, and I removed decades of grime. My initial manual cleaning was weak. I thought I was doing a good job, but I really wasn't after I compared my manual cleaning results to what I got out of my ultrasonic cleaner. I broke the roller jewel when I initially reassembled everything and had to replace it. I damaged the hairspring multiple times. What I mean by that is I actually purchased multiple replacement hairsprings because I damaged the hairsprings from sloppy tweezer work or from sloppy hairspring truing work. I lost roller jewels and I lost cap jewels a couple of times. And I learned a lot in truing hairsprings in the flat and in the round. And the experience that I got and the lessons learned came at some expense. I'm much better at truing hairsprings now than I was when I started. The other mistake I made was I should have replaced every damaged jewel I saw when I initially assessed the movement. Instead, I just replaced only the most damaged ones, and that wasn't sufficient. And even now, there's still at least one jewel in there with a minor flaw that I have in the back of my mind that I ought to replace. There are still some things that I don't understand. I don't know how this movement performed when it was brand new. I don't know if I can ever find that out. Of course, there are guidelines and rules of thumbs for vintage pocket watches, but geez, it would be nice to stumble upon some ancient Waltham watchmaker's text about this movement and actually read what the amplitude should be when it's new. I don't know why the beat error is greater in each position at 24 hours than it is at full wind. I saw some sparkles on the first full wind, but they kind of disappeared, and if they don't come back, I guess I should ignore them. I can't very well diagnose something that's no longer there, but it's a little bit of a head scratcher. The amplitude drops a good 20 to 25% after 24 hours, and I wonder about what I could do to increase amplitude and or reduce the 24-hour drop. Maybe pivot polishing would help. I don't know, but those are the things that I wonder about. In the next video of this series, I'm going to try my hand at cleaning the case and the dial and the hands, and then reassembling the watch again. And that's all I have for you today. Till next time, take care.